Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me check my sound. Irrepressible! Irrepressible! I am back, ladies and gentlemen. Bended but not broken. Copyright strike. The dispute went into my favor and they got rid of it. My sound. That's why I always check my sound. That is why I always check my sound. That is why I always check my sound. That's one. Check the sound on the speakers also. All right, speakers look fine. Hope everyone is doing okay. I am back. I feel like I want to say welcome back, but it's not really me saying welcome back. It's more so me just being back. I won the copyright strike clearly, otherwise I would not be here. And so, what I'm going to do, I want to thank Jordan Sheridan for coming on the show first. Second, I want to thank each and every person that supports the show. You guys are immensely important. And all of the kind words that I get when the show goes down or when something takes place or when something happens that's kind of weird or bizarre or out of the ordinary. Whenever something happens, people are nice as can be with all of the kind words that they can give. So I am going to thank all of those people that give support to the show, that send information to the show, that give kind words to the show, that like the videos on the show, that share the show. And even if you don't necessarily like what I said, but you gave me the benefit of the doubt, thank you very much. Thank you very much. You guys help the show prosper. Can't have a show without an audience. And especially the way I do my show. I do my show in a way that allows a lot of interaction. So thank you guys very much. You're immensely appreciated. And of course, patrons, by the way. Patrons and super chat. Of course. Of course. I mean, just in blunt ways of assisting the show, thank you very much. I am going to do the exact show that got copyright strike last time. Fuck that. I am doing the exact same show because that is an amazing show. The Fog of War is an amazing video. It is a profoundly amazing video. It's Robert McNamara. This is going to be a show where I look back in time for context. It's not enough for me to come onto the show and this is what I think. These are my thoughts. These are my views. This is how I come across a particular point of view. It is also important to getting across why I think the way that I think. Why do you come to that perspective? Why do you come to that particular point of view? Yes, there's a logic thing built into it, I would say. Meaning, if you want to have a sustainable world, do you have a sustainable world where people are at each other's throats? I would say no. Meaning, can you have a sustainable world at the point of a gun, at the barrel of a gun? Defense Secretary Robert McNamara was very influential on me. Extremely so. In an odd way, in as much as Noam Chomsky and even Howardson. And I know this sounds weird, coming from someone who was a defense secretary, but it is. I mean, the guy is talking about having somebody immolate themselves, set themselves on fire at his doorstep, at his front doorstep at work. Think about that. Like you're a functionary. You come from the private sector. You come into the thing, and something that you're engaged in has got people so worked up and so pissed off that they feel the need to douse themselves in some kind of accelerant and set themselves on fire to get their attention. Like, I need to get your attention. Something that you do matters so much to me that I need to literally set myself on fire. The pain that I am about to experience matters less than what I need to get across to you and the point that I need to make. Yes, it shook him. He's a person. It shook him. He's a person. Robert McNamara has gotten older, of course. And in getting older, he looks back and he has certain lessons that he wants to talk about and certain lessons that he wants to discuss. They're profound. They're utterly profound. And he does this, he looks back on this with a certain gravity. A certain, I was engaged in the slaughter of a lot of people. And engaged in being in the wholesale slaughter of a lot of people. There's certain things, certain foibles, fuck-ups, things that I know now that I didn't necessarily know then. Things that I need to get across to a younger generation or just anybody who would lend me their ear to say this. When a man comes around. Oh, I love it. I love the historical stuff. I get a kick out of historical stuff. Like when you hear the conversations that he's having with JFK or you hear the conversations that he's having with LBJ, it's almost as if you're in the room as they're making certain decisions that deal with the death of a lot of people. It's gravity. It's gravity. Yes, I get excited about this because I'm fascinated by this. My wife is like, you understand that not everybody is as fascinated about that as you are. No, you might not be. You might not be. How was Disneyland? How was Disneyland? Were there sprinkles? Did they do things? Was there a guy in a mouse suit who was roaming around? This is gravity. It's exciting because it's gravity. The things that it matters more. It doesn't just matter more to me. It matters more. It matters more. It's fascinating. So, I am going to show you the video that I showed last time they got struck. I'm going to show you in this a different way. I may say, fuck the copyright stuff all I want. At the same token, they did take my goddamn show down. So, I'm going to show you this on another channel. This channel has sparkles and sprinkles and stuff like that built into it in order to prevent the detection mechanism. So, I'm going to show you this. Hopefully, it does not. Yeah, hopefully it'll be okay. Let's see if it works. And let's. Oh fuck! I hope this works. I hope this works. I hope this works. Everybody likes to be a bad guy or a badass until time comes around, shit comes around. All right, so this is the video. I apologize for the volume. The volume is really low on this, but it is an amazing video to hear. And maybe what I should do is, let's do this differently. Let's do this in a different way. Just make sure. I'm going to give you the audio of this. Don't be a pussy. Don't be a pussy. Just do it. All right, this video. Here we go.
Part of was 3 years in the U.S. Army during World War II. 7 years as Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War.
The volume on this is way too low. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the picture of Robert McNamara, and I'm going to play the video. This is not me punking out. This is me showing you a picture of Robert McNamara and showing the video. I'm going to put a link to the video at the bottom, however. Here we are. So the video that I had before, right? Yeah, because this one plays well. Yeah, guys, I strongly advise you watch this video. I know I'm being somewhat of a punk here because I don't want this to take down my channel. Because for all intents and purposes, I like having live streaming capability, and I feel more natural during live stream as opposed to doing the videos and pushing them up. So let's do this. So yes, both things are intruding into my perspective of this. All right, I'm just going to show you the picture of McNamara while playing the video because I think it's awesome. All right. All right, this is McNamara.
This is the Secretary of Defense of the United States, Robert McNamara. His department absorbs 10% of the national income of this country and over half of every tax dollar. His job has been called the toughest in Washington, and McNamara is the most controversial figure that has ever held the job. Walter Lippmann calls him not only the best Secretary of Defense, but the first one who ever asserted civilian control over the military. His critics call him a con man, an IBM machine with legs, an arrogant dictator.
By the way, the first section of this, to give you a little context before just kind of throwing you into this. Like I said, Robert McNamara looks on his life and says, what can I impart to the previous generation as they go about their affairs? He breaks these into various lessons. So the first lesson is this idea of empathize with your enemies. And he talks about this within the context of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's going to talk about this again from within the context of the Vietnam War and what is mind-blowing in what he's saying. Like, yeah, I just play it. But take a listen to this. And again, Cuban Missile Crisis, empathize with your enemies.
Mr. Secretary, I've noticed in several cabinet offices that little silver calendar thing there. Can you explain that?
Yes, this was given by President Kennedy. On the calendar are engraved the dates October 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and finally 28 were the dates when we literally looked down the gun barrel into nuclear war.
Under a cloak of deceit, the Soviet Union introduced nuclear missiles into Cuba, targeting 90 million Americans. The CIA said the warheads had not been delivered yet. They thought 20 were coming on a ship named the Poltava. We mobilized 180,000 troops. The first day's air attack was planned at 1,080 sorties, a huge air attack.
The next 24 hours, what is it we need to do? First, we need to do two things. First, we need to develop a specific strike plan. The second thing we have to do is to consider the consequences. I don't know quite what kind of a world we live in after we've struck Cuba. How do we stop at that point?
That is profound. Think about what they're saying. Like, oh man, think of the conversation that they're having. When you're talking about gravity, oh, that's gravity. They have a strike sortie plan. We're going to strike Cuba. The Soviet Union is moving missiles into Cuba. Okay. We haven't gotten into why the Soviet Union is moving missiles into Cuba. Just at the standpoint of, regardless of how it happened, as President of the United States, you find that out. You know that. This is not, we think this chemical weapon. No. They're moving weapons into Cuba. Nuclear weapons. Those nuclear weapons are going to attack the entire United States or the entire seaboard, depending upon the technology of those weapons. The President of the United States, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? The military guys, all of these things on their sides are saying, we need to strike Cuba right off the bat. We need to strike. We need to strike. We need to bomb Cuba. We need to bomb Cuba. There's no other option but to bomb Cuba. And President Kennedy, politically savvy, a high opinion of himself. People call him Camelot. And because he has a high opinion of himself, he's more in line to say, ask those type of questions of, what does the world look like the day after we strike Cuba? Isn't that an interesting question? We are going to attack Soviet installations in Cuba. What does the world look like? Here's a question. After you strike, are you going to get all of them? You're talking to the generals. They have things on their shoulders. Are you going to get all of them? And beyond whether or not you're going to get all of them, are you certain that you're going to get all of them? And if you don't, what happens? What happens? Isn't that an interesting question? Those are the questions that Kennedy was wrestling with, because Kennedy was right. To a hammer, the world looks like a nail. And they are telling him to strike Cuba. He doesn't even know whether or not those missiles are currently active. And if those missiles are active and he strikes Cuba, he does not know whether or not the Soviet Union would immediately strike the United States. These are the stakes. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fucking fascinating. Fucking fascinating. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Let me make sure I'm up. Yeah, I'm still up. All right. Make sure I'm up. I'm slightly freaked by the copyright strike. Fair enough. Let's keep going, because this is awesome. What, like, this is fucking fascinating. And he asks the secondary question. Look at this. Look at this. How do we stop at that point? It becomes mechanistic. Me harping on this channel about apocalypse, this fallout reality. I don't do this willy-nilly, nor do I do this in hyperbole. I do this because that's a perfect realization of what could take place based on what happens. Somebody gets shot, and it starts World War I. One thing tumble into the next, where states themselves don't necessarily, meaning the representative of those states, have less control than the mechanistic processes that take place. What happens? What happens? Explain to me what happens. If Russia attacks the United States ships, let's say they sink a ship because that ship was responsible for attacking one of the installations that hit Russian soldiers. Explain to me, tell me, what happens in the United States at that point? What are the processes that come to bear upon Donald Trump and that political staff? What happens? You know what happens. Both of us knows what happens. All of us knows what happens. It doesn't matter whether or not the chemical strike took place at that point. It becomes a mechanical process. Oh my God! They sunk one of our ships. There were 20, 30, 40, 100, 1,000 brave Americans on that ship. How dare you? What is the president going to do? What is the president going to do? What is the president going to do? Is the president going to respond to this? Is the president of the United States going to respond to this? Or is he a Putin puppet? Cenk Uygur, is he a Putin puppet? MSNBC Journey, is he a Putin puppet? Rachel Maddow, is he a Putin puppet? Everybody would scream, is Donald Trump a Putin puppet if he does not respond to that? It becomes mechanical processes. It doesn't matter what the president, it doesn't matter who's in that office. It's mechanical process at that point. John F. Kennedy at this point has sense of mind and presence of mind to say, how do we stop at that point? What does the world look like at that point? And how do we stop? How do we pull this back from the brink? He's perfectly aware of where they are. These are the conversations they're having in this office. The conversation of, is the world going to end? Think about that shit. Talk about gravity. Let's keep going. Love it. Absolutely love it. Sorry, I get wild. I'm wild with history.
I don't know the answer to this. The chances of it becoming a much broader struggle are increased as you step up to talk about the danger of the United States.
Kennedy was trying to keep us out of war. I was trying to help him keep us out of war. And General Curtis LeMay, whom I served under, as a matter of fact, in World War II, was saying, let's go in, let's totally destroy Cuba.
Understand what's taking place in the Kennedy administration. John F. Kennedy, civilian control of the military, does not want us into a war. He doesn't want it. The people he surrounded himself with don't want it. The military is okay with it. We need to blow the shit out of Cuba. Fuck the consequences. We need to blow the shit out of Cuba. Who is Donald Trump surrounded himself with? Explain to me. Who is the reality show host going to listen to? Explain to me. Regardless of what the reality show host said while he was running in the campaign trail that he got a lot of Trump supporters involved in, a guy with a bunch of things on his shoulders comes to reality show host and he says, if you don't sign these documents, a lot of people are going to die. Do you really want that on your conscience? I've been serving in the military for 40 years. Trust me. I know what's best. I know what's best. What are you going to do? Are you going to allow these people to die? Are you going to allow American citizens to die? Are you going to allow people in that country to die? We're doing God's work. What are you going to do, reality show host? I've been doing this for 40 years. Donald J. Trump. Every document. Donald J. Trump. The military is running the political scene at this point. You're supposed to have civilian control over the military. Fact is, you put a reality show host in as president who has no experience with any of this stuff, regardless of the image of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump goes to bed at 3 in the morning. Donald Trump understands that he has no experience with any of this stuff. And when his people come to him, he's going to say, okay. The fact that he hired John Bolton should demoralize each and every Trump voter that thought he was going to do something on this thing of international politics. I'm sorry, you were mistaken. This is where we are now. I'm sorry. This is where we are. This is what I think. And I strongly think this, and I strongly suggest people take very seriously the mechanistic processes that can take place with the decisions that are made currently. We are bombing in the country to which we are in illegally. Russia, Iran, Syria, the UK, Turkey, France, America, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all have interests in Syria. This is a tinderbox. This tinderbox can explode, and it will drag everybody else in with it. And this is a tinderbox that's exploding, that's dealing with nuclear power nations. And at the helm of the quote-unquote allies is Donald J. Trump, reality show host / president of the United States. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
On that critical Saturday, October 27th, we had 2 Khrushchev messages in front of us. One had come in Friday night, and it had been dictated by a man who was either drunk or under tremendous stress. Basically, he said, if you'll guarantee you won't invade Cuba, we'll take the missiles out. Then, before we could respond, we had a second message that had been dictated by a bunch of hardliners. And it said, in effect, if you attack, we're prepared to confront you with masses of military power. So what to do? We had this, I'll call it the soft message and the hard message. At the elbow of President Kennedy was Tommy Thompson, former U.S. ambassador to Moscow. He and Jane, his wife, had literally lived with Khrushchev and his wife upon occasion. Tommy Thompson said, Mr. President, I urge you to respond to the soft message. The president said to Tommy, we can't do that. It'll get us nowhere. Tommy said, Mr. President, you're wrong. Now that takes a lot of guts.
We're not going to get these weapons out of Cuba probably anyway. By negotiation. Hey, I know agreements, President. I think there's still a chance. Get that down. The important thing for Khrushchev seems to be able to say, I saved Cuba, I stopped the invasion.
In Thompson's mind was has gotten himself in a hell of a fix. He would then think to himself, my God, if I can get out of this with a deal that I can say to the Russian people, Kennedy was going to destroy Castro, and I prevented it. Thompson, knowing Khrushchev as he did, thought Khrushchev will accept that.
That is vitally important. All politics is local. even though it may end up on an international scale. Understand what I mean by that. Khrushchev has certain realities that he himself has to deal with as a political leader in Russia, at the Soviet Union. People like to think that it's one party. Yes, it's one party, but there's still factions within that particular party. Those parties are not necessarily just unilateral in their particular disposition. There's a power base. Everywhere has a power base. It doesn't matter what it is. There are hardliners in Moscow, just like there are hardliners in the United States. And those hardliners are pushing Khrushchev, in this case, in the same way that the generals are pushing Kennedy, just strike Cuba. Fuck it. Just do it. Just do it. Khrushchev understands, in the same way that Kennedy understands, oh my God, they're talking about oblivion. They're talking about destroying the entire world. That's what we're talking about. Those are the stakes that we're at. And the weight, the stress, bearing down on a man, dealing with that particular responsibility, knowing full well that the decisions that I've made here, yes, they were in response to the United States, but nevertheless, the decisions that I've made here may destroy the entire world. They characterized the Soviets as being these, as being monsters of sorts. He fully understood the gravity of events, just like Kennedy understood the gravity of events. They were both human beings. They were both human beings. He had the problem. How do I step back from this? I said I was going to put missiles in Cuba. I told everybody understood it, meaning my power base understood it. How am I going to back away from this? The United States is confronting me with this. If I back away from this without getting anything from this, I will look weak and I would likely lose my political position to somebody who's far more hardline than I am. I need to save face. Everyone does it. Think of it from an internal politics standpoint. Exclude the international politics. Internal politics. Democratic Party shuts down the government. We're shutting this shit down. Bring this to a stop. In my head, I have Spider-Man holding the train with the spider webs, and he's like, Tommy Maguire, just holding. Stopping this train. Stopping this train. For 3 days. A limousine shutdown. 3 days. And then, okay, we're starting back up. Now, the question becomes, what did you get out of that? You did it for DACA. You say you were doing it for DACA. You said you cared about the people who came to this country. Yes, they may have been bought here illegally, but at the end of the day, they grew up here. They're for all intents and purposes Americans outside of the legal thing. You said you cared. You run on identity constantly. That's your own selling point. That's the only selling point, I would argue. What did you get out of this? Outside of the t-shirt, what did you get? Deborah Wasserman Schultz gets on television and with dead eyes and a straight face says, we have the potential for momentum. You got what? We got the potential for momentum. Now, I listened to this and laughed aloud as soon as I heard it. It sounds utterly ridiculous. But you understand she has to explain and save a certain amount of face at the ridiculousness of what just took place. All political people need to save face. You're representing a large number of people. Those people don't like to believe that the person who's representing them is being weak. The problem is the weakness thing. It's the incentive is for leaders to be strong. That's just built into the whole political system. Doesn't matter what it is. Who wants a weak leader? Nobody wants a weak leader. People want people to have a certain amount of strength in their affairs. Well, that's also true abroad. People are people are people. Khrushchev needed a way to save face, and he didn't know a way to save face. And the best that he could get was, don't invade Cuba. Don't invade Cuba. Leave Cuba to its devices. The hardliners immediately get a hold of, also send a message. The hardliners' message is, you can go fuck yourselves. We're ready. They're ready for oblivion. Now, the catch for this is, Kennedy now has an out. We have two messages. Which message do you want to answer? The person said, who was living with Khrushchev says, answer the first message. The first message is the one that you need to answer. That allows him to save a certain amount of face and it allows us to pull us back from the brink. I love this, man. When I talk about people like North Korea, or when I have this conversation about Syria, and I say the people who are running those countries, they characterize these people as being two-dimensional characters. They're not two-dimensional characters. They're human beings. They may have a certain point of view that's somewhat fucked up and skewed in a way that we can't necessarily understand. But ultimately, their governments have allowed them to have a certain amount of power in those governments. And so they exert the power that are allowed to them in those governments in the same way that people in our governments exert the power that is allowed to them in our government. If Obama was in that government, Obama would be doing something similar, if not the same thing. If Assad was in this government, he would be doing something similar that our political leaders would be doing. It's not the person. It's not that the person is insane and fucked up. That person is in a society that someone insane is fucked up. It allows him to behave that way. For whatever reason, they've allowed him to behave that way. That's the way their society has evolved. I guess my point is, he's a person in that society, however, doing that. He wants to maintain his position just like Kim Jong-un wants to maintain his position. And they do certain things in order to maintain their position in the same way that anybody else in any other particular government would do. They do fucked up things. That's true. Governments in general, to varying degrees, do fucked up things. I analyze them as human beings. That's how I analyze them. It's not that Kim Jong-un is a crazy maniac that likes to fire off nuclear missiles. No, he's terrified that the United States is going to invade that country in the same way the United States has invaded other countries. And he finds that a nuclear bomb is a deterrent to keep them away. I may not be able to beat you in an actual conflict, but I have teeth and I would bite the shit out of you if you come after me. We have a pit bull. That pit bull is 70 pounds. Love him to death. He's the most lovable dog you would ever come across. He's a 70-pound lap dog. He looks like he is bought to eat you. That's how big he is. And he has these massive teeth. Massive teeth. If needed to, I could put my pit bull down and beat the shit out of that pit bull. But I would have doubts because he could bite the living shit out of me. He would lose, but god damn it, it would hurt. Nuclear bombs are essentially teeth. They have the teeth. Let's let him finish. It's important to understand this, man. I do this historical context stuff because I think it's important to see what people did prior, what people think about what people did prior. And otherwise, how do you have any context on what's taking place now? Kids, even me, we have a certain disadvantage when we look at our current politics because we don't necessarily have the great context of what took place prior. The shit that they teach in schools, it's a view of America. It's a view. It's not a good one, but it's a view. Let's keep going. Don't want to get too far into the weeds.
And Thompson was right. That's what I call empathy. We must try to put ourselves inside their skin and look at us through their eyes, just to understand the thoughts that lie behind their decisions and their actions. Khrushchev's advisors were saying, there can be no deal unless you somewhat reduce the pressure on us when you ask us to reduce the pressure on you.
Also, we had attempted to invade Cuba.
Well, with the Bay of Pigs, that undoubtedly influenced their thinking. I think that's correct. But
one of the things that I love about the fog of war is that the guy who was interviewing him seemed really indignant. Like, it almost like the guy seemed like he didn't even like Robert McNamara. He asked him questions in ways that were just scathing. And so he's like, well, yeah, but we also tried to invade Cuba. You know, he's like screaming at him as he's doing this. Because I have to be honest, I do the same thing when I look at videos and I think about this stuff. I'm like, yeah, you're trying to say that they were putting these missiles in, but they were putting these missiles in because you tried to invade Cuba and you tried to kill Castro like 100 times. Like, let's be honest. Let's, give the honest reasons why this took place. This is kind of what I'm getting to. People think in the United States of the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's just these wily Soviets that tried to put missiles in Cuba for no reason. No, they tried to put missiles in Cuba because Castro said, oh my God, they're trying to murder me and they're trying to invade Cuba. Do you know that the CIA, when I look at the world, yes, I'm wilding out. When I look at the world and I look at news, I have to take into context stuff that's taken place prior. Because that stuff informs your decision on what people potentially may and will do, at the very least up until a point. So one of the events that the CIA tried to do was to either kill some Floridians or make it look like they killed some Floridians in order to come up with a pretext for us to invade Cuba. Pretexts, for whatever reason, always important. They were willing to do that, real or simulated. He didn't put those missiles willy-nilly. He did it because we tried to invade Cuba. They looked at it as a deterrent for the United States aggression on Cuba. I love this video, man. Let's keep going.
More importantly, from a Cuban and a Russian point of view, they knew what, in a sense, I really didn't know. We had attempted to assassinate Castro under Eisenhower and under Kennedy and later under Johnson. And in addition to that, major voices in the U.S. were calling for invasion. In the first message, Khrushchev said this: "We and you ought not pull on the ends of a rope, which you have tied the knots of war. Because the more the two of us pull, the tighter the knot will be tied. And then it will be necessary to cut that knot. And what that would mean is not for me to explain to you. I have participated in 2 wars and know that war ends when it has rolled through cities and villages, everywhere sowing death and destruction. For such is the logic of war. If people do not display wisdom, they will clash like blind moles, and then mutual annihilation will commence."
When the Soviet Union is having this conversation about war, let me make sure I'm up. Yeah, good. I'm still up. Yes, I'm slightly freaked out by it. When the Soviet Union is having this conversation about war, Khrushchev, it means more. It just means more. Like, we have a jaded perspective from the standpoint of war. We sit back, we allow them to go about their affairs, bombing one place after the next, and we smugly say, well, they're doing it to protect America. Now, when the Soviet Union is having this conversation about war, even from the standpoint of World War II, the United States lost maybe 100,000 people. The Soviet Union lost like 20 million human beings. Like, it was some ungodly number that the Soviet Union lost in that war. Not to mention in World War I. They were invaded in both wars, in World War I and World War II. For them, it matters more. Right now, at this very moment, we have circled the Soviet Russia. I keep flipping between the two, I'm sorry. We've encircled Russia, NATO nations, with weapons and armaments and everything else. They've been invaded. They're sensitive about their borders because they've been invaded. Right now, we're paying neo-Nazis resources, giving them resources. In Ukraine, killing Russians. They're sensitive about their borders. They were sensitive about their borders then. They're sensitive about their borders now. The letter that he gave to Kennedy came from this heartfelt place of, look, I am not going to explain to you what this conflict would mean. At very least getting across in stark terms of annihilation. He's right. He's right. Let's show the last one. I have one more, and this video is going rather long. Let's see. Where are you? Right here. No, it's not that one. Give me 1 second, guys. I had this video up, and I might have closed it. Damn. This particular one was empathize with your enemy. The next one has to do with preparing to re-examine your reasoning. So McNamara goes into the analysis of the Vietnam War, and in talking about the Vietnam War, he comes to this fascinating realization of this level of clarity that and it goes back to the empathize with your enemy. If we could understand the perspective of the person who we're in opposition to, maybe we will come to a different conclusion. And not just a different conclusion, maybe a different solution to the problem itself. That's an honest assessment of what's taking place. Meaning, if you can come to this honest assessment of your real conflict with the person, if you're being honest, oftentimes they're not being honest in where they go about their affairs, but if you're being earnest and you honestly don't want to necessarily have a war, and war is the last resort, if you have an honest assessment of your opponent, maybe you guys are misunderstanding what's taking place. And maybe you need to re-examine your reasoning in this particular assessment. This is the same lesson that he comes to. He calls it a different one, re-examining your reason. The first one he was calling empathize with your enemy. But both of them fundamentally are the same lesson. Try to understand your opposition, and maybe you'll come to a different conclusion. This is, let's see.
The fighting and most of the dying. But week after week,
Here we are.
American casualty figures go up.
Now, America wins the wars that she undertakes. Make no mistake about it. And we have declared war.
This is LBJ, by the way.
And aggression. If this little nation goes down the drain and can't maintain her independence, ask yourself what's going to happen to all the other little nations.
Not going to continue to intrude on this, but this is the Domino Theory. They had this theory that if one nation becomes a Soviet nation, and then it would just be another and another and another and another. And so you had to stop it at its root, meaning you have to stop it before it starts and before it spreads. Now understand, part of they're pissed off about this is, who are we going to sell our goods to if these guys are Soviets? If these guys become communists, who are we going to sell our goods to? We're a capitalist nation. I mean, this is antithetical to us. We're not going to be able to, go about our affairs in the way we go about our affairs. We're going to have less and less nations with regards to capitalistic expansion. To some degree, their issue here was somewhat economic, even though they made it look like it was this kind of, ideology type thing. Thing is, their thought was, we don't want this to expand. We don't want this to spread. And so their idea was, even if we need to put in a strongman, even if we need to put in a dictator, do you understand that they put in dictators in some of these countries as opposed to allowing the country to have some level of self-determination? It was gross. They used this domino theory to explain massacres or horrors, let's say it that way. We did horrible things in pursuit of this particular idea, and Vietnam was one of them.
I am more and more convinced that we ought to think of some action other than military action as the only program here. But I think if we do that by itself, it's suicide. I think pushing out 300,000, 400,000 Americans out there without being able to guarantee what it will lead to is a terrible risk and a terrible problem.
Let me go back one moment. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, at the end, I think we did put ourselves in the skin of the Soviets. In the case of Vietnam, we didn't know them well enough to empathize. And there was total misunderstanding as a result. They believed that we had simply replaced the French as a colonial power, and we were seeking to subject South and North Vietnam to our colonial interests, which was absolutely absurd. And we saw Vietnam as an element of the Cold War, not what they saw it as, a civil war. There aren't many examples in which you bring two former enemies together at the highest levels and discuss what might have been. I formed the hypothesis that each of us could have achieved our objectives without the terrible loss of life. And I wanted to test that by going to Vietnam. The former foreign minister of Vietnam, a wonderful man named Tua, said, "You're totally wrong. We were fighting for our independence. You were fighting to enslave us." We almost came to blows. That was noon on the first day. Do you mean to say it was not a tragedy for you when you lost 3,400,000 Vietnamese killed, which on our population base is the equivalent of 27 million Americans? What did you accomplish? You didn't get any more than we were willing to give you at the beginning of the war. You could have had the whole damn thing, independence, unification. Mr. McNamara, you must never have read a history book. If you'd had, you'd know we weren't pawns of the Chinese or the Russians. McNamara, didn't you know that? Don't you understand that we have been fighting the Chinese for 1,000 years? We were fighting for our independence, and we would fight to the last man, and we were determined to do so. And no amount of bombing, no amount of U.S. pressure would ever have stopped us.
That is profound. That is utterly profound. Let me make sure I'm still up. Yeah, I'm still up. He's making this point that you guys were in this war, doing all this bombing, and it was a war that you couldn't win. You guys fought this war on an insanity pretense. Insanity from the perspective of the Vietnamese. Your perspective, meaning the Vietnamese perspective, is you took over from France, and France fucked us like nobody's business. Now, why on earth would we expect you to do any different? Now, the United States is coming into this thinking you guys are going to be a Soviet nation, and China is going to be controlling you in some way, and they're like, you're insane. If you would have opened up a history book, if you would have even thought about it, for one moment, from our perspective, those 3 million people will still be on this planet. Part of my issue with the mainstream media is the perspective that they give. They warp the perspective around American interests. That's problematic. Fact is, the American public needs an honest and fair appraisal of the situation before they're making a decision to go to war. Usually, people don't necessarily like going to war. They don't necessarily want to expend resources, nor do they want to send their sons and daughters or uncles or whoever to go off and fight in some war in this way. The mainstream media, the perspective that they give is always warped from the American perspective. If the United States is doing something, it's right by definition that the United States is doing it. It is not, it's heresy to ever bring up something that the United States is doing across the world that's wrong. If somebody says the United States was supporting terrorists, the mainstream media, well, that's not what the government says. Well, yeah, I understand that, Jake Tapper, but is it true? And is your job to be a stenographer and push back for the government, or is your job to discern what's true? The biggest problem with the perspective is when people are looking at that, they're getting this perspective that something that we're doing is right, even if what we're doing is wrong. And the mainstream media, or the public itself, doesn't necessarily get that perspective that maybe this is illegal. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. What is the perspective of the other nations that are involved in this? And what is the perspective of the other nations that are involved? Honestly, why is Kim Jong-un doing the nuclear missile? Is it right that he's doing the nuclear missile? What is it? Is it right from his perspective as a political actor, meaning taking him as a political actor and not a two-dimensional figure? For his perspective, is it right that he gets the nuclear missile? Is it right that we bomb Libya? What are they doing in Libya right now? What are they doing to the Yemenis right now? Are they storming Yemenis? What is our association with Saudi Arabia? These are questions that you should be constantly answering if you're in the mainstream media. And if you're not, you're failing. Fundamentally failing. This is fascinating and fucking important because it makes this thing of, before we make the determination to go to war, maybe we should try to understand the perspective of the person we're going to war with. And maybe, just maybe, we'll come to a different conclusion if we can understand it from their perspective. Maybe they're not cynical SOBs who are just out to fuck around. Maybe they have actual interests, and they also don't necessarily want to necessarily come to conflict. Robert McNamara, Fog of War. I think there are 11 lessons. These are only 2. All of it is amazing. All of it is amazing. Let's see. I'm not going to hold this one. I think I'm going to do another one on Brexit coming up. So this one is going somewhat long. But the one on Brexit should be pretty interesting because Theresa May is under fire because she has no solutions to Brexit. What's Brexit? What's Brexit? What do you mean Brexit? Hey, can we talk about the spy? No, we're talking about Brexit. That's what we're talking about. Cynical of the spy thing, yes. All right, guys. Let me make sure. Yes. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always help the show out through Patreon. Thanks, everyone.